Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, January 24th. Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we see a gale producing 28-foot seas targeting Hawaii, and a secondary fetch that is producing, about 34-foot seas in the Gulf of Alaska, mainly targeting Pacific Northwest up into Canada. And yet another system starting to form off Japan. This is one that we will be looking at very closely. But first up, let's take a look at jet stream level winds. These winds, up about 30,000 feet, help support the formation of storms. When those storms do form, help direct their track. We have a very healthy jet stream flow here. As one can see, 220 knot winds on the upper end of our scale here, roaring off of Japan, fully consolidated, falling into a trough that is a dip in the jet stream. That helps promote a counterclockwise circulation that is the hallmark of low pressure, and also down at the surface creates low pressure, and that helps create winds, which helps create seas, which creates swell, which radiates and eventually creates surf at our beach. Anyway, this wind here and this trough here, this trough is supporting the gale that we currently saw in the Gulf of Alaska, but it is these winds here that eventually could support a new storm that is forecast to develop off of Japan very shortly. Now also notice, the jet is split here once we get to a point just a little bit northeast of Hawaii, right around 145 west. So that means most of the moisture that would be associated with this storm complex is going to push to the north, and typically between a split jet stream flow you get high pressure. And so that is the pattern expected for California for the next couple of days. Clear skies, lack of rain, maybe even light offshore winds, a nice respite from what has been a rather stormy, windy, messy period, at least from Monterey Bay northward. Not so much so for Southern California, though. Anyway, let's put this into motion. Roll this out, and we see these winds holding into Monday and then working their way Tuesday over the date line, and then fading some come Tuesday. But a nice little trough digging out here, a secondary trough, if you will. And there we go. There's, again, our classic counterclockwise pattern, dip in the jet. This will support what is supposed to be a significant storm tracking through the western Gulf into Wednesday and Thursday. And yet more winds start building here. The jet fully consolidated. Notice this split point moves to 130 west by late Wednesday night. And then, what is this? A 200 knot winds start building over Japan again Wednesday night into Thursday. And the beat just goes on. Here we go. Another trough forecast for Friday and into Saturday. And we'll see where this goes from here into Sunday. We're almost at the end of our window, but basically the pattern just goes on. Also, notice here the split. Let's go back and find out what happens to the split. Now, there's a bit of a split here. Let's go right there. It was. There's the big split. Come Thursday, let's say Friday night sometime, the jet fully comes onshore into California. Now, a bit of a split here. We're unsure, but for the most part, it looks like generally a consolidated flow. See, that split gets cut off here really quick. Whoops. And by the time we get into about the end, late Sunday, it's just about a fully consolidated jet running the whole way across the Pacific, coming right into California. This is classic, significant El Nino sort of upper level setup. Let's go see what's forecast down at the surface. So here we go. Surface level pressure, surface level winds. First, our gale that's currently in the Gulf of Alaska, a little patch of 50 knot winds generating those, what were they, 34, 36 foot seas or so. Was that about 956 millibar low there? Pretty low, but very tiny. Broad secondary fetch, though, here over the date line. And here's our next system already starting to develop. You can just about see a little sliver of 55 knot winds there. Let's put this into motion, and here we go. We're into Monday morning, 55 knot winds, embedded in a broader area of 45 plus knot winds. The previous gale here in the Gulf fading out rather quickly. This system, it doesn't take a lot, 55 knot winds, and they continue for a bit here. Oh, look at that. Wait a minute. There you go. Embedded in from that, 60 to 65 knot winds. So that's just about hurricane force. You don't get large fetches. This typically relatively small, but that's all it takes to generate very high seas, especially if it goes, let's go back. So it starts, when is that, Monday, 6Z, and it continues just going pretty much east-southeast into, there we go, 24 hours of 55 knot plus winds. Very impressive. All getting assimilated in the Gulf of Alaska come Tuesday. Still a broad area 50 knot fetch, and continues on even into 45 knot winds into Wednesday. Very solid system indeed. Remember the split in the jet. And there's your high pressure ridge protecting California from what is otherwise, I don't know, 1,500 miles plus of 30 knot northwest winds aimed right at the U.S. West Coast. And this is at the end of the system. Still very impressive indeed. No doubt large swell will result if this system forms as expected. And yet another system forecast behind it, not supposed to be as organized, 35 knot fetch. That's good for like a 13-second, maybe 14-second period swell. There's some embedded 40-knot winds in there. But here, on any normal winter, just this system here, which we're almost blowing off and not getting particularly interested in, it looks fairly decent. It's a little bit fragmented, not super cohesive. But anyway, that goes into Friday and hangs out into Saturday, and then here you go, reinforcements come off Japan into Sunday, and the atmosphere is just primed, and there you go, 55 knot winds forecast. So it's just a machine. The jet consolidated, just flowing steadily, pretty much west to east, and it gets a little undulation in it, creates a trough, and boom, instantly you just have system after system. And the other part to notice here is all these systems are stirring up the ocean surface. So when the next system comes along, if there's already a base sea state of 10 or 15 foot seas, and then you throw another 40 or 45 knot winds on there, those 10 to 15 foot speed bumps are just great for the wind to latch onto and just start imparting more energy into the ocean. So the point being that even if all of a sudden, boom, everything just cut off came, let's say Monday a week from now, there's probably a week's worth of swell of some kind that will just keep dribbling into Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast, even assuming the machine shuts down, which there's at this point no obvious sign that it's going to. So here we go, significant wave heights, or sea heights as we call it, for the North Pacific Ocean. Here's our current gale. We could go back and start doing all the analysis on it, but this one is just not super impressive. It's solid. Swell is already starting to reach Hawaii, and it's going to come into the U.S. West Coast. This is a decent one. You know, theoretically, we probably could have numbered it and called it a significant class swell, but we're getting a little bit stodgy. This is the one we're more interested in. We're calling it number 7. Now, let's put things in perspective. During the 97-98 El Nino, 97-98 Super El Nino, there were 39 significant class storms, and that we're talking 20-foot Hawaiian surf into California or Hawaii, and we even let a bunch of the small ones go just because they, it was a blown out mess or whatever. We're currently at number 7 with this one, and we might have left 1 or 2 off. We'll see how it goes. Just sort of put some benchmark to see where we go, where we're at come end of March or so. I don't think we're going to get anywhere near 97, but still, if we can get up into the maybe 15 to 20 range, that would be quite respectable indeed. Okay, moving along. Significant wave heights. This system up here in the Gulf pretty much peters out by Monday. It's gone. And here comes our new system. 12Z Monday approaching the date line. Boom, there you go. We've got, what is that? Let's say 51 foot seas and 62 knot winds in that system. And it continues into 6Z Tuesday again, almost 52 foot seas, 55 knot winds, and then starts fading. On Tuesday was at 48 foot seas, but just sort of look at the path here, just pretty much building steadily, working its way into the Gulf. Then it sort of falls apart a little bit Tuesday night, seas down to 40 feet, and winds in the 50-knot range. But then it kind of gets a second life here on Wednesday and builds a little area of 43-foot seas, aim pretty good at the Pacific Northwest up into British Columbia, but still good sideband energy. Look at all still 30-foot plus seas down here. This is all just going to slam right into here, and you can see the sea front from it already working its way into Hawaii theoretically on Wednesday night into Thursday. And what is that? That is roughly, eyeballing it, 15 to 16-foot seas, and we're not even talking about what the period is on that. Now, some of that's wind-produced wave. You got to strip out the, the 13, 12-second period energy, 8-second period energy, and really focus on the longer period energy in the probably 17, 18, 19, 20-second period bands there. Certainly solid swell expected for Hawaii. And then the same deal coming into the U.S. West Coast later in the week. And then here comes our next system on Friday. Now, not nearly as big, sort of like the system that's in the Gulf right now. What is that, 27-foot seas or so? Good again for just the trajectory of this thing for Hawaii. Probably good for solid 15-second period swell or so. And ultimately, that'll work its way into the U.S. West Coast. Whoops. And then we have yet one more system late Sunday developing on the dateline. And we'll just do a real quick look here at great circle paths relative to this storm. Here's the peak of it relative to Hawaii. What is that? About the about 325 or so. But notice that the swell, the energy is almost not quite perpendicular to the great circle paths, but somewhat down here. It's better aimed, but not in the core of the system. In fact, we'll go back here. It's better aimed generally earlier in the storm's life. When it peaks, a lot of that energy is pushing east of the great circle paths to Hawaii, but relative to Northern California, the picture is much more positive. You can see basically it's a straight west to east line into North California, and the system tracks pretty much right up those paths except towards the end. And then relative to Southern California, it's pretty much the same thing. They share very similar paths. A lot of energy going up into California, Southern California as well, and for that matter, down into Baja. So regardless, swell is going to be expected for all the major surf locations along the U.S. West Coast and Hawaii. A quick look at the swell profile suggests swell arrival in Oahu, North Shore, about midday Wednesday, peaking pretty much close to the late in the afternoon time frame, and then fading out on Thursday. That might be a little bit stilted towards the front here, but close enough. And relative to Northern California, probably more focused in the latter part of the work week. And then Southern California, latter part of Friday into Saturday. But again, the models have been rather dynamic. That is, they're not stabilized yet. One run will show the system looking very good. The next run will have it very weak, and it's just been playing this ping-pong game for days now. So any of these forecasts, they will change radically from one run to the next. So at best, this is just a rough guideline. Consult the site and monitor it as this thing develops. So for now, we see that the swell production machine is very well oiled and quite productive. Let's go take a look and see what's going on longer term, and we can tell you this, things are only getting better, not worse. Okay, first up, looking at winds, surface level winds over the Kelvin wave generation area, what we call the area roughly on the equator, the intersection of the equator and the date line, and it's really this area from about 135 east to about a point south of Hawaii. We look for the presence of westerly winds, and there's just a little bit there, mainly trades in effect, but notice the trades are all north of the equator. South of the equator, it's almost dead calm. That translates in terms of anomalies, differences in normal for this time of year. It's an effective eastward drift or westward anomalies as you see here. And what that means, this is classic El Nino. Now, it's not nearly as strong as it was a week ago or a couple of weeks ago. And that is, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but still a general west to eastward push is going on in this area. Doing a closer inspection, this is the Kelvin wave generation area, again from 135 east. There's New Guinea there. Date line is right here. We're talking just 5 degrees north and south of the equator. The equator's right there. And here's all these east winds we were seeing, but that's pretty typical this time of year. But notice what's not typical is no winds south of the equator. And in fact, we have west winds, little patch here to maybe 22 knots. Most of that's blocked by the islands, but this little bit here that's free of the islands. Typically, early in the year, you'd be looking for west winds to create Kelvin waves. At this point, it's not about creating Kelvin waves. It's just to have westward anomalies. That tends to support the jet stream. And as we know, the jet stream is raging right now, and it will continue to be supported by this westward anomaly pattern that's going on in the south half of the Kelvin wave generation area. Let's just do a quick run through. We see these west winds, again, sort of flare up a little bit Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday. It almost looks like something tropical trying to organize there, but it doesn't really quite happen. And by Thursday or so, that peters out, and we're just down to generally a light wind pattern in the Kelvin wave generation area. We'll roll this out, and we're into a week out. And notice this, though. Easterly trades recede well to the north, and it almost looks like the westerly anomaly pattern would be better established a week out. A quick look at days past. So the Kelvin wave generation area, you can just barely make this out. There's New Guinea there. So it's, if you drew a box right about in here, and this is back on the 18th of January. So we see our little westerly wind pattern in play there, and we'll just scroll down, and basically it's just staying in place. This is classic sort of mid-grade plus El Nino situation right now. If the active phase of the MJO were to move over this area, it would sort of partner with the El Nino base state and amplify it, and you'd get a really strong westerly wind burst. But we're just coming off of one of those now, so it's not unexpected that things sort of settle down a little bit. And here's another way to view that. So this is the whole planet going the whole way around the world. We're going back in time, December 25th. Actually, it was about the 19th of December. The reds and the oranges and whites are westerly anomalies. The Kelvin wave generation area starts somewhere about here and goes to about here. And you can plainly see that as the whole part of early January, look at this, we just had a major Kelvin wave, major westerly wind burst. And now as we're getting into, here's the current date today, things are winding down. So we're coming off a giant push of westerly anomalies, if not out and out west winds. And so it's not unexpected that for the next week here, you can see that the pattern really settles down for a little bit. So this westerly wind pattern was fueled a little bit by the MJO. We'll get into that, but currently we see, per the statistic model here, basically nothing going on. All the westerly anomalies we see are all attributable to the El Nino base state. Now, what is forecast is about 5 days from now, the inactive phase of the MJO. That is here. This is outgoing long-wave radiation. That is sunlight reflectivity off the ocean's surface. This suggests high pressure, the inactive phase of the MJO, because you get more sunlight reflectivity. The active phase of the MJO is here over Indonesia. That is more clouds, westerly anomalies, and less sunlight reflectivity. So this pattern, this model suggests over the next 2 weeks, the active phase of the MJO is to start working its way into the West Pacific, with the inactive phase currently, somewhere, let's say near the date line, easing its way to the east. The dynamic model is not quite as generous and suggests that, the MJO might start working its way over in Indonesia, but in 2 weeks it's not going to make it into the West Pacific. So the thought is that at some point here, the jet might lose a little bit of energy, the storm pattern might back off a little bit, and we might go into a bit of a doldrum. The real issue is, how much is this going to affect the El Nino base state? And if it doesn't affect it too much, the jet stream will just keep raging. We suspect that's probably going to be the case. It might lose a little bit, but nothing dramatic. If anything, it might have the jet split off the U.S. West Coast, bring nicer weather, but the storm track would still be more focused over the date line, and so we just have cleaner but maybe smaller surf. Hard to say. That's just a educated guess. And we've looked at these before, the phase diagram. So basically you're looking down on, let's say from the North Pole, looking down on the Earth and around the peripheries, the maritime continent, let's say Indonesia, over the West Pacific to the United States and South America, and then the Atlantic Ocean and Africa, and then back around to the Indian Ocean here. And this dot shows you where the active phase of the MJO is in the Indian Ocean. If it's the further away from the center you get, the stronger it is. So it's a very weak active phase, about as weak as you can get in the Indian Ocean right now for both these models, the GEFS, Ensemble GFS, and the ECMF models. The forecast suggests, at least in this model, that slowly the active phase is to build a little energy and start moving its way over the maritime continent. The GEFS says pretty much the same thing, maybe a little bit more aggressive eastward movement, but not as much strength to it. So basically we're in sync here, and this is pretty much in sync what we saw with the earlier models. Now looking more than 2 weeks out, so this is a nice little chart. You've seen this before. Again, the Kelvin wave generation area runs basically from here to somewhere around in here. Here is past history down at the bottom. Here was this giant Kelvin wave number 4 that occurred in the October time frame. Or westerly wind burst number 4 that created a huge Kelvin wave. Now here we go. Here's the most recent westerly wind burst that just happened here in late December and January. Almost looking more impressive than this one. This we believe is creating Kelvin wave number 5. That's occurring right now. And then you see, as is going on right now, these the yellows and oranges are westerly anomalies, of course, that basically the westerly wind anomaly pattern backs off a bit until about middle of February. So what's that, 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks, something like that. That's typical MJO sort of pattern, and then supposedly westerly anomalies are to pick up again. Let's overlay the MJO pattern here, and clearly we saw we were in the active phase of the MJO. MJO isn't even supposed to happen at all during strong El Niños, but it is. You can't argue with it. The last big westerly wind burst we had that created Kelvin wave number 4 occurred in October. Here we got another good pulse of the active phase of the MJO that has created what we believe is Kelvin wave number 5. Then we have a bit of a break, the inactive phase of the MJO. Then the MJO wakes up again in the mid-February time frame. And a little bit muddled here, unsure what's going on, but the nice thing is westerly anomalies to continue. We would expect a good run of storm and swell production during this time frame if all this plays out as forecast. The model has actually done amazingly well so far in this El Nino run, so we'll run with it. Also, equatorial Rossby waves, a little bit of a Rossby wave forecast here in the early February time frame, but no real effect in terms of winds because the inactive phase of the MJO is pretty much taking over. And of course, the El Nino base state, as you can see, it's slowly easing its way to the east, but not so much. I mean, according to this, even in April, we're still in a very active El Nino pattern. With lots of westerly winds in play. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, but this has been a slow plodding El Nino, but determined nonetheless. There's a lot of latent heat energy built up in the ocean, and it's got to work its way out at some point. And until it's all gone, El Nino will stay in play. All right, so we've talked about westerly winds and the MJO, which helps force westerly winds. The effect of westerly winds on the equator in the West Pacific is to take warm water that's normally piled up there, push it to the east. Clearly, we see this big wedge of 29 degrees centigrade water pushing normally what would be all over here to the west of the dateline, well past a point south of Hawaii, and sort of working its way towards the Galapagos. The 28-degree isotherm at 120, what is that, 125? So that's about south of California, roughly. So a significant shift in actual water temperatures, but it's not the actual water temperatures that matters so much. It's the differences in normal for this time of year. And here is the interesting part. Last week when we looked at this, 4-degree anomalies were all gone. 5-degree anomalies were gone. But we had that major westerly wind burst again in late December, early January, and already you can see, even though there wasn't much warm water over here, whatever there was is all of a sudden getting forced to depth, and this is what we have now is the start of Kelvin wave number 5. Significant change, improvement in the subsurface. We're down, 100 meters, and basically in the central to west Pacific. New Kelvin wave developing, moving off to the east. This is good news. This will help to refresh. Eventually, it will work its way east, get to the surface, gurgle up somewhere around the Galapagos or maybe just west of the Galapagos, and then start reinvigorating the warm pool, the El Nino warm pool on the equator there west of the Galapagos, then get caught by the trades, push back into the Nino 3.4 region, and continue to fuel El Nino. So the thought is it takes about 2 months, typically 3 months, but we're going to assume that this Kelvin wave is going to erupt like all the others before it to the west of the Galapagos, so its life cycle will be a little bit earlier. It ought to reach the surface, in short, about March 1 and continue to fuel the warm pool probably well into all of March into early April. And by then, you know, that's as much as you can expect from any El Nino. This is a very, very good situation. You also see here cooler than normal waters building up. This is the classic El Nino end phase, El Nino cycle. Normally, this pattern is reserved all the warm waters here, all the cool waters here. We've done a complete flip-flop. This is what El Nino is all about, is transport of warm water from the West Pacific to the east, and we are there in spades. Higher resolution subsurface data also showing the same thing. Last week, all we had pretty much was this one little pool here, and that was it. And we saw cool water digging in all down here to about 120 west. All the cool water's gone now. All of a sudden, we have these blooming pockets of 4-degree anomalies and 5-degree anomalies, and it continues to build. This is most impressive. We expect all this warm water to slowly start building up in this area, and you'll see temperatures go up. Maybe we'll see even some more 6-degree anomalies. It's hard to say. We're really kind of almost shocked at how much warmth there is here as early in the downwelling Kelvin wave cycle as there is, but we're not complaining. This is all good news for fueling the jet stream and storm development. So this was the chart that really caught our attention. Was it maybe 2 days ago when it was updated? Last week when we looked at this, all there was 10-degree or 10 centimeter anomalies. So this is, again, sea surface height anomalies. Differences normal for the time of year. Strip out all the waves, strip out the tides, the chop, everything. And this just shows where there's bumps or bulges in the ocean surface. And that's an indication of warm water at depth, because warm water at depth expands and basically pushes surface waters up a little bit. So last week, all there was 10 centimeter anomalies here. By the way, this is from the Jason 2 satellite. And now all of a sudden, in the period of 1 week, we have 15 centimeter anomalies, and every day this pool has grown a little. 1 day ago it was 2 distinct little lobes. Now they're joined, building. All this suggests that warm water is building at depth. Again, this is a proxy for what we saw in the previous 2 images, and again, all of it is westward displaced right in this area. The Galapagos are right there, South America there. Again, very good sign. And our evening would not be complete without viewing the upper ocean heat anomalies, our favorite chart, because this clearly shows West Pacific here, East Pacific here, going time from past to present, and you can see Kelvin wave number 1 here that occurred in the March time frame, Kelvin wave number 2 in the June time frame, massive Kelvin wave number 3 that occurred in the fall, early fall, even larger Kelvin wave number 4 that occurred in the November time frame. We saw all these temperatures collapsing here into December and go, that's it. We wrote it off, said that's it for our El Nino. No more westerly wind bursts, no more Kelvin waves. Then, lo and behold, we get into late December, early January, another westerly wind burst, and look what we have going here. Now, all of a sudden, temperatures have rebounded significantly. We see just the early shades of 2 to 2.5 degree anomalies starting to show here at the bottom of the chart. We do not expect to see 2.5+ degree anomalies in this. We do not expect this Kelvin wave to compete with these other 2. But even if it does, Oh, like something like those two. Considering how late in the season it is to be getting another Kelvin wave forming, that would be massively impressive, and we would be very self-satisfied to see that happen. And that would just add credence to the fact that this El Nino, though it's probably not a super El Nino, is a strong El Nino. The jet stream pattern certainly suggests it's a strong El Nino, and the subsurface pattern, if this were to happen, would just be the final nail in the coffin. So we've talked about westerly winds that push warm water that normally is pulled up here to the east. We've talked about the MJO that helps fuel that and facilitate it. We've looked at the subsurface profile and seen warm water building under the equator down here. And then we also know that at some point those Kelvin waves, they gurgle up in the vicinity of the Galapagos and then create the classic El Nino warm pool signature. Now this year's warm pool is westward displaced. That is, normally you'd see a lot of warming right here. The Kelvin waves would work their whole way into Ecuador, start erupting here, and then trades would take that warm water and bleed it off this way. But this year's El Nino, all the eruption has been right in this area here, west of the Galapagos. We expect that to still hold true. The interesting part about that is what it's done is because the warm water has less further to travel, it more easily makes it into the Nino 3.4 region, which runs from 120 west to about 170 right in here, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. And so we've had very warm temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region, and with another Kelvin wave on the way, it will continue to keep this area warm as well. Now, we did see 4 degrees. It'd be almost a brownish color. A lot of 4-degree anomalies here for, what was that, September, October, November into early December. They have all faded out as Kelvin wave number 4 has fully dissipated now. But still, we have a generally very warm pattern, so 2.5 degrees or so. We'll get into that in a minute. And anyway, good looking pattern, not epic compared to 97 or 82. You'd want to see more heat build up in this area and up into the coast of Central America, but not bad. Let's get into the details. So quickly, we'll go sector by sector. Nino 1.2, temperatures, 2.25 degree anomalies, very spotty at best. Here's the Galapagos. Everything appears to be west of the Galapagos. Here's where we were a week ago, and you can see the temperatures have collapsed even more. And then moving off to the west, here we go. Galapagos are off the picture over here. We see, again, 2.25 degree anomalies, well entrenched. But if we go back a week, there's a week ago, here's where we are now. Things are definitely on the downswing for sure, but still very respectable. Again, this is because Kelvin wave number 4 has erupted, discharged fully. The subsurface warm pool pretty much was collapsed until this week. It's now on the rebuild, so it's no surprise that these temperatures will collapse. But then as that subsurface warm pool builds and it starts to erupt in a couple of weeks out, this will start regenerating again. This in turn fuels the jet stream fuels storm development, etc., etc. So we're going to have a little bit of a pause here, it looks like. Now here's the one little bright spot. Here we are, the last little sector here from 160 out to 180. The Nino 3.4 region ends here at 170. Here's where we are today. Here's where we were a week ago. And what you see is actually temperatures are building some out here. Whether that's attributable to the westerly wind burst or not, hard to say. Probably not, but still, we'll take it. A little bit of growth in this last little sector here. Here's the 7-day trend data. Now you see there's a lot of warmth building down here off of Chile and Peru, but it's really the areas that we're concerned about are up in here. And actually, 3 days ago, there was a very thin, see this, you can almost see a hint of a little thin blue line there going out here. It was much stronger a couple days ago. Now it's pretty much just everything's neutral. Here's a little bit of warming out here towards the date line, but basically just a so-so pattern, not unexpected. And then back to where we started, because we're now looking at temperatures. You can still see clearly there is a good pocket of 3-degree anomalies here on the equator. What is that, about south of Hawaii? And basically it goes from the date line to about 110 west or so. Very warm pattern indeed, classic El Nino. If La Nina was in effect, this would all be, you'd be down into the blues, 2 to 3 degrees below normal instead of 3 degrees above normal. Graphically, we can look at the temperature trend in the Nino 1.2 region. Again, that's between the Galapagos and Ecuador. Clearly, this area has been bouncing all over the place. We've been bottoming out lately. No big surprise given the satellite data. Still temps above, 1 degree above normal. Nothing to sneeze at, 1.26 for today, but nothing particularly warm. The Nino 3 region, basically steady state. It's been hovering near the, let's say, 2.5 to 3 degrees since mid-October. No big change, down a little bit, but nothing significant. Still at 2.567. That's very, very strong El Nino territory. And the region that really matters, the Nino 3.4 region. This is how NOAA determines the strength of El Nino. And the neat little thing here is notice that the temps have actually come up in the past week or two, down just a little bit today at plus 2.604. But, we were up at one point in the 3-degree range. This is when from a water temperature perspective, El Nino peaked out in the November time frame. But the atmosphere wasn't ready to do anything with that yet. It is now because we are deeper into winter, and you see the effects on the jet stream. Temperatures back up recently, and with the next Kelvin wave in development, that's good news, and that will happen to erupt about the same time the MJO is turning active, so there could be a pretty solid pulse of storm development in the March time frame. Now, all this warm water and jet stream stuff it's really the warm water doesn't mean anything. You could have all the westerly wind bursts in the world, all the Kelvin waves, and the big old warm pull off of the Galapagos doesn't mean anything unless it's coupled with the atmosphere and affecting the configuration of the atmosphere or coupling with it, as they say, at a global level. One measure of that is the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin and Tahiti. If you have a negative index here for a long enough period of time, it certainly suggests the active phase of the MJO, but when it goes on for an extremely long period of time, that suggests El Nino. And clearly we see, just going back here for the past 30 days. The first 3 days of that period were positive. Since then, we've been in the minus 20 or greater into the minus 30s. Today's value is minus 28.10. The 30-day running average, we have made tremendous strides here. We wanted to be down at minus 20. That would be classic strong El Nino. That's where we are today, minus 20.48. And then the 90-day running average, we wanted to see that somewhere down around minus 18 or 15 or so. We're at minus 12.65. It's just going to take a little bit longer because it's a 90-day running average. There's a bunch of positive values up on the front end of this thing that are dragging it a little bit, but still looking very respectable. Graphically, you can see here's the 30-day run Southern Oscillation Index. See where we're at back in January 2014. This was the start of the El Nino. We tried to have El Nino in 2014, kind of sputtered, didn't quite make it. But then we got into 2015, and it's just, you could basically draw a line right here going in a steady downward trend. And here's the latest run of negative numbers. We're down just about as low as we were at the peak. Another couple of days of negative numbers, and we will be there for the 30-day running average, suggesting that we are again in very solid coupled atmospheric situation in terms of El Nino. A similar sort of view here is the ESPI index, difference in cloud cover between north of Darwin and the Tahiti area here. Actually, it's a much broader area than that on the equator. And what we're looking at is differences. Here's rainfall anomalies north of Australia and then over the dateline. All the warm water is pulled up here, remember, so warm water supports evaporation. Evaporation supports cloud cover and storm development, and therefore rainfall. It is also a way to transport moisture up into the atmosphere, which helps fuel the jet stream as well, running up around in this area. Anyway, current value plus. Now this runs positive if you have a lot of rainfall in this area and not so much here. plus 2.12. We were up to 2.33 maybe 2 weeks ago. But again, this is the highest this thing ever has been during this El Nino is like 2.4, I think it was, or so. So we're in great situation. Typically, this guy starts collapsing as you get into the later phases of El Nino. And no, this guy's, he's holding strong. So this sort of gives some credence to the thought this El Nino might have a little bit more legs than we originally suspected, and that it might be a bit of a late bloomer, and that you shouldn't give up the faith that this thing isn't going to have some serious environmental impacts or atmospheric impacts here in sometime in the future. And then finally, the forecast. Per the CFS V2 model for the Nino 3.4 region, here was our peak at about 2.95 per the model, and when was that? Early November. This originally had this guy crashing pretty early, but now these are actual values, or as close to actuals as I can get per this model. Even into January 1st, we were up in about the 2.8 range. The prediction is that temps will slowly fade to 2.5 degrees by sometime in February and then start their way down. The interesting part about this, notice as you get out into the July time frame, temperatures bottom out at 5 degrees, or half a degree, 0.5 degrees above normal. And then notice it starts making a little upward dip. Now, we don't believe any of this, but the point being, El Nino threshold, if you had anomalies that were 0.5 degrees, you'd be in a minimum El Nino. What we typically see is after a strong El Nino, the temps go boom down into La Nina temperature, and you're into the -1, 2s, and 3s. Instead, this model is suggesting that we're going to actually sit here somewhere slightly above normal, which would be interesting. It's also interesting that we have a Kelvin wave this late in the game. We're wondering if, and because this El Nino kind of took its time getting going, or we're wondering, I don't want to say that any of this is true, but we're wondering if perhaps we're not engineering ourselves here for a soft landing, that we might not bump into a full-bore La Nina come next year. That's the hope. It seems more like fantasy land at this point in time, but you never know. Something to keep your eye out for. So for now, the jet stream, extremely well primed, very productive, solid storm projected moving over the dateline in the next few days, with more gale activity behind that. Major Kelvin wave, well, at least major westerly wind burst, with a decent-sized Kelvin wave in flight right now, prolonging the life of our El Nino, giving us hope for long-term, the whole way through probably into the March, April, May-ish time frame. No expectation that the storm track will materially change, as it's probably going to take a little dive here for a little bit as we go into the inactive phase of the MJO, but then we expect things to wake up again beyond that once we get into, mid to late February or so. So at this point, the game becomes one not of trying to catch every swell you can, though it's always a good thing, but at some point you're going to burn out. Maybe better to pace yourself. Hope you certainly trained well this summer, because you're going to need it. It looks like there's a lot of surf on the way, and the beat just goes on. Anyway, that's it for this week. We'll do it again next week. Same time, same channel. See you then. Bye.